My name is Helen Collins. I'm 29 and work at the local library in a small, quiet town that most people have probably never heard of. My life is simple, some might say too simple, but it's mine, and I like it that way. I've always been the reserved type, preferring books over the noise of the outside world. The library is my haven. It's an old, cozy building with creaky floors and worn shelves, but to me, it's perfect. Each morning, I unlock the library at 8 a.m., switch on the lights, and take in the comforting scent of old books. It's a routine that never tires me. My parents passed away when I was young, so I was raised by my grandmother. She was a kind, gentle soul who encouraged my love for reading. But now, she's gone too, and it's just me. No siblings, no extended family, just me and my peaceful little world. Good morning, Helen, Mr. Jenkins says as he enters. He's a regular, an older gentleman who loves reading history books. Good morning, Mr. Jenkins. I've set aside some new history titles for you that arrived yesterday. I reply with a smile. Ah, you're always a step ahead of me, he chuckles, shuffling over to the shelf. The day moves along like any other, with familiar faces coming and going. I help a group of kids find books for their school project, suggest a romance novel to Mrs. Harrison, and direct Mr. Thompson to the science fiction section. It's a quiet existence, but it's one I cherish. There's comfort in the routine, in knowing what to expect. Then one day, everything shifted, the day Jack walked into my life. He came in asking for a book, but I could tell right away he wasn't the usual library goer. Dressed in a sharp suit, with a confident air, he seemed a bit out of place. Can you help me find something? He asked, his voice smooth and confident. Sure, what are you looking for? I answered, trying to hide my curiosity. A novel, The Great Gatsby, I think. Follow me, I said, guiding him to the classics section. When I handed him the book, our fingers briefly touched, and a spark ran through me. It was just a moment, but it lingered in my mind. Thank you, Helen, he said, glancing at my name tag. I'm Jack, by the way. Nice to meet you. Nice to meet you, Jack. That simple interaction marked the start of everything, the beginning of a love I thought would last forever. The start of a journey that would take me far from the quiet life I knew into a world filled with chaos and heartache. If only I'd known then what I know now, things might have turned out differently, but life doesn't come with warnings, and sometimes we learn lessons the hard way. After that first meeting, Jack started coming to the library more often. It was unusual, as he didn't strike me as someone who loved reading, but each time he came in, he'd ask for a book suggestion and then stay to chat with me for a while. One day, as I struggled with a box of new arrivals, Jack walked in just in time. Need some help with that? He asked, stepping over. I wouldn't say no, I laughed, relieved. As we shelved the books, he asked, so, what made you want to work in a library? I shrugged. I've always loved books. They feel like friends, in a way, plus, it's peaceful here. He smiled. I can see why you like it. It's like stepping into another world. Our conversations became longer and more personal with each visit. I learned Jack worked in real estate for his family's business. He was easy to talk to, and for the first time in a while, I felt like someone was genuinely interested in me. Then, one day, Jack caught me off guard. Helen, how about dinner tonight? He asked, his eyes hopeful. Like, a date? I asked, surprised. Yes, like a date, he grinned. I hesitated for a moment, but something about him made me say yes. All right, I'd like that, I replied, trying to sound calm. We went to a quaint little restaurant in town. It wasn't fancy, but it was cozy and intimate. We talked about everything, and for those few hours, I felt like I'd stepped out of my solitary life. As he walked me home, Jack said, I had a great time tonight. Helen, you're different from anyone I've ever met. I didn't know what to say, so I just smiled. I'd love to see you again, he added. I nodded. I'd like that too. From that night on, we started seeing each other regularly. Sometimes we'd have dinner, other times we'd just go for a walk. It felt nice, being part of something, stepping out of the quietness of my life. Before long, I had fallen for him, hard. He was charming, attentive, and he made me feel special. So when he proposed, I didn't think twice, I said yes. If only I had seen the warning signs back then. But love can blind you, making you miss the things you shouldn't ignore, and I was completely blinded by Jack. Once we got engaged, things began to change. It started with his parents. They didn't approve of me. They thought I wasn't good enough for their son, that I came from the wrong background. The first time I met them, we had dinner at their home, and I was nervous. It was an extravagant house, far beyond anything I'd ever known. Helen, this is my mother, Margaret, and my father, Richard, Jack introduced. Nice to meet you, I said, trying to seem confident. Margaret looked me over. So, you're the one who works at the library? Yes, that's me, I answered, feeling smaller with each passing second. Richard didn't hold back. Jack, couldn't you have found someone a bit more suitable? I wanted to disappear. The dinner dragged on, filled with subtle jabs about my background. It was clear they didn't think I was good enough, but Jack defended me, which only made me love him more. Before the wedding, they insisted on a prenuptial agreement. They said it was a formality. I didn't have much to lose, so I signed without a second thought. After we got married, I moved into Jack's house. Well, it was technically his parents' house, a wedding gift, but they acted like it still belonged to them. They would drop by unannounced and start bossing me around. Helen, make us some coffee, Margaret would demand the moment she walked in. And without complaint, I would. I never intended to stir up trouble. One day, Margaret gestured toward the television and remarked, just a reminder, Helen, in the event of a divorce, you won't be able to claim this. It was a constant theme. They incessantly reminded me that I owned nothing in that house. Jack underwent a transformation, too. He wasn't the person I fell in love with anymore. He began to join in on the jests his parents made at my expense. One evening, while deciding what to wear for a family gathering, I sought Jack's opinion. This outfit makes you look less dull, he chuckled. It hurt deeply. It was as if he morphed into someone entirely different in front of his parents. He no longer defended me. Instead, he laughed alongside them. Living in that house became draining. I felt like an outsider, an unwanted visitor. I kept wishing for improvement, but things only deteriorated. The stress took a toll on me. I started experiencing severe stomach pains. I tried to brush them off, but one day I fainted at the library. When I regained consciousness, I was in a hospital. The doctor informed me that it was stress-related. I spent several days there, and Jack didn't come to see me or even call. I felt incredibly isolated. Then, one day, a notary entered my room with news. My great-aunt, whom I barely remembered, had passed away, leaving me her fortune, $30 million. I was in disbelief. I had no idea how to handle such a sum, but suddenly I wasn't just the broke girl from the library anymore. When Jack and his parents learned of this, they came to visit, beaming with joy and sweetness. "Oh, darling, we're thrilled for you," Margaret said, her voice dripping with insincerity. "Indeed, we're family. We should be there for one another," Richard added. I saw through their act. The shift was too sudden. After they left, I overheard them chatting outside my room, unaware I was eavesdropping. "She's such a fool, can you believe our luck?" Jack chuckled. "We need to ensure she doesn't leave you, Jack. Maybe you should have a child with her, that will keep her tied down," Margaret proposed. I felt nauseated. They didn't care about me, they were only interested in my money. At that moment, I realized what I had to do. I needed to escape that house and reclaim my life. I refused to be their victim any longer. Leaving the hospital, I had a plan. Upon returning home, I found Jack and his parents waiting for me, all smiles, pretending to be the caring family they had never been. "Oh, Helen, we were so concerned about you," Margaret exclaimed. I nodded but kept quiet. I had to maintain a facade. I couldn't let them suspect anything. Jack stepped closer. "So, when will you receive the inheritance?" he asked, his eagerness evident. I looked at him, the man I once loved, and realized I no longer recognized him. "Soon," I replied, "but it's not something you need to worry about." His smile dimmed slightly. "But we're married, Helen, what's yours is mine, right?" I forced a smile. "Of course, darling." That night, sleep eluded me. Their phony concern and avarice echoed in my mind, making me feel sick. I got up and began writing, documenting everything they had done and said. It was as if a dam burst, releasing years of bottled-up frustration and pain. The next morning, I had a meeting with a lawyer. I recounted my experiences and presented the prenuptial agreement. He was taken aback but assured me that the agreement would protect my interests. "You're making the right choice," he encouraged. When I returned home, I found Jack and his parents in the living room. They glanced up as I entered. "There she is, our brave girl," Richard said, his smile devoid of warmth. I sat down. gripping my purse tightly. I have something to say. They all turned their attention to me, intrigued. I'm filing for divorce, I declared, my voice firm. The room fell silent. Then Margaret exploded. What? You ungrateful little. Jack jumped to his feet. Helen, you can't be serious. We love you. Do you, Jack? Because I don't feel loved. I feel exploited. Margaret was furious. We'll sue you. We'll claim half of your inheritance. I reached into my purse and produced a copy of the prenuptial agreement. Actually, you can't. This states that neither of us can claim the other's property in the event of a divorce. They were left speechless. For the first time, I felt empowered. I stood up. I'm leaving, and I don't want any of you to contact me. I walked out of that house, their shouts and insults trailing behind me. It was the hardest decision I'd ever made, but as I drove away, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. I was free from their disdain and manipulation. For the first time in a long while, I could breathe. I didn't know what the future held, but it had to be an improvement over the past. I rented a modest apartment in the city. It wasn't anything extravagant, but it was mine. For the first time in years, I felt a sense of tranquility. While I was still navigating the divorce, I felt capable of handling it. One day, the lawyer called. Helen, there's something important regarding your great-aunt's will. I was curious. What is it? There's a stipulation. You must allocate a portion of your inheritance to a charitable cause. It was your great-aunt's final wish. I was taken aback. I had no idea. The lawyer continued. She was quite the philanthropist. It seems she wanted to pass that legacy on to you. After hanging up, I pondered deeply. My great-aunt had given me an opportunity to make a positive impact. It felt like a sign, urging me toward a new path. I began researching charities and causes, determined to do something meaningful, something that would create a difference. That's when I discovered a small organization focused on assisting women who had suffered domestic abuse. It resonated with me deeply. I reached out to them and arranged a meeting. The woman I met, Linda, was passionate and dedicated. We offer shelter, legal assistance, and counseling to women in need, Linda explained. I listened intently, moved by the stories she shared. I want to help, I expressed, feeling a sense of purpose I hadn't experienced in years. I invested a portion of my inheritance into establishing a new shelter, and it was an incredible sensation to know I was helping other women escape their situations, just as I had. A few weeks later, Linda invited me to the shelter's grand opening. Although it was a modest gathering, the atmosphere was filled with hope and appreciation. As guests mingled, I spotted a familiar face in the crowd, Sarah, an old colleague from the library. Helen, is that really you? She exclaimed, astonished. Sarah, it's been ages, I replied, embracing her warmly. What brings you here? She inquired. I shared the story of the shelter and my involvement, her eyes widening in surprise. That's fantastic, Helen, I had no idea. It's a fresh start for me, I said, beaming. We spent the evening reconnecting, and it felt good to rekindle our friendship, as if pieces of my life were finally coming together again. As the event came to a close, Linda approached me. Helen, I can't express my gratitude enough. This shelter is going to transform lives. I looked around at the faces of the women who now had a safe haven. Honestly, it's the least I could do, I said, feeling a warmth inside that had long been absent. Days began to blur together, each filled with the fulfilling work at the shelter. I was discovering a newfound purpose, something that truly belonged to me. Then, out of nowhere, my phone rang. It was a number I hadn't seen in ages, Jack. My heart raced with mixed emotions, but curiosity prevailed. Hello, Jack, I answered, keeping my voice steady. Helen, I need to see you, it's important. His tone was urgent. With reluctance, I agreed to meet him at a public cafe, hoping the familiar setting would give me strength. As I sat across from Jack, he appeared different, defeated, and almost pitiable. His eyes were filled with desperation. Helen, I messed up. I want you back. I've come to realize how much you mean to me, he said abruptly. I looked at him, feeling nothing but disdain. Why now, Jack? He sighed. My parents, they controlled everything. They were the reason our marriage fell apart. I was weak, but I've changed. Anger surged within me. You blame your parents? You stood by while they treated me poorly. You laughed with them, Jack. He reached for my hand, but I pulled away. Please, Helen, I know I was wrong. I've really changed. I gazed at him, recognizing the man I once loved, yet feeling nothing for him now. Changed or not, It's too late. I feel absolutely nothing for you, Jack, only contempt. His expression fell, and for a brief moment, I caught a glimpse of the man I married, but it was fleeting. I'm sorry, Jack, I've moved on. I have a life now, a purpose. There's no room for you in it, I said firmly. He nodded slowly, resignation etched on his face. I understand. I just had to try. As I left the cafe, I felt a burden lift from my shoulders. It was truly over. The next day, the shelter hosted an event to unveil a sculpture donated by a local artist. As I stood surrounded by supportive individuals, a sense of belonging washed over me. Sarah, my former colleague, stood by my side. You've accomplished something wonderful here, Helen, she remarked, smiling. The artist removed the cover from the sculpture, revealing a figure of a woman reaching towards the sky. It symbolized hope, strength, and new beginnings. Applause erupted, and for a moment, everything felt right in the world. Linda approached me. Helen, this is just the beginning. There's so much more we can achieve. Looking around at the hopeful faces, I realized she was right. This was my new beginning, and I was ready to embrace it wholeheartedly. My new life was busy and fulfilling. Each day at the shelter brought fresh challenges and rewards. My confidence blossomed, and for the first time in years, I felt in control of my destiny. I even began taking self-defense classes, something I never would have considered before. One day, as I was leaving the shelter, I noticed a car parked outside. It was my mother-in-law, Margaret. She stepped out as soon as she spotted me. Helen, we need to talk, she said, her voice softer than I had ever heard it. I have nothing to say to you, Margaret, I replied, maintaining my composure. Please, just listen. I've come to realize how wrong we were, she implored. I paused and studied her. She seemed sincere, but I couldn't forget the past. What is it you want, Margaret? I want to apologize. I treated you horribly. I've lost my son because of it, and I don't want to lose you too. You were like the daughter I never had, she said, tears glistening in her eyes. I felt a flicker of sympathy but quickly pushed it aside. Margaret, you made my life unbearable. An apology won't change that. I've moved on, and I suggest you do the same, I stated firmly. She reached out to me, but I stepped back. Please, Helen, I know I can't change the past, but I want to make amends. I shook my head. It's too late for that. Goodbye, Margaret. As I walked away, I could sense her gaze on my back, but I refused to look back. I had learned to stand up for myself, and there was no going back to how things used to be. The following day, I received a letter from Jack's lawyer, contesting the divorce settlement. I wasn't surprised, but I felt prepared. I met with my attorney, a sharp woman named Rachel. He has no case, Helen. The prenuptial agreement is clear. He's just trying to intimidate you, she said confidently. I nodded. I'm no longer afraid of him. Let's fight this. The court date arrived, and I entered with my head held high. Jack was there with his lawyer, and for a brief moment, our eyes locked. I caught a glimpse of the old Jack, the one I had loved, but it quickly disappeared. The judge listened to both sides and rendered her decision. The prenuptial agreement was upheld, and Jack's claims were dismissed. A wave of relief and triumph washed over me. After the court session, Jack approached me. Helen, I'm sorry, I was wrong, he admitted, his voice low. I looked at him, recognizing the man I once loved, but feeling nothing for him now. Goodbye, Jack. Take care of yourself, I said as I walked away. Leaving the courtroom, I felt a profound sense of closure. That chapter of my life was finally over, and a new one was beginning. At the shelter, we were organizing a fundraiser that was demanding all my focus. The community's support was overwhelming, filling me with gratitude. The night of the fundraiser arrived, and the venue buzzed with energy. People from various backgrounds came together to support our mission. As I surveyed the crowd, I realized how far I had come, from a quiet, timid woman to someone who advocates for herself and others. Helen, you did it. This is incredible, Sarah exclaimed as she approached me. I smiled back. We did it, and there's so much more ahead. As the event unfolded, I felt a deep sense of accomplishment and purpose. This was my life now, and I was exactly where I belonged.